Get your fill of tech, travel, sport and documentaries. Weekends on the BBC News Channel.
This is BBC News. I'm Ben Brown, live in Brussels, where the Prime Minister is this afternoon for a crucial EU summit, the day after surviving a confidence vote at Westminster. Well, Theresa May is hoping to win fresh concessions from European Union leaders here to break the deadlock over the Irish backstop.
I don't expect an immediate breakthrough, but what I do hope is that we can start to work as quickly as possible on the assurances that are necessary.
I'm Simon McCoy here in Westminster, where the government has set out its timetable for parliamentary business next week, which doesn't include plans for MPs to vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal, amid voices calling for her to step down.
This isn't an ordinary election and an ordinary electorate. It's a very peculiar election, and that's why, if you look at the historical precedents, I still think the Prime Minister should resign, because she clearly doesn't have the full confidence of Parliament.
In other news, the government announces a 2.8% rise in funding for councils in England. And hospital beds in England were almost full last week, with the usual winter pressures still to come.
Hello and welcome to BBC News. We're live here in Brussels, where Theresa May has arrived, attending a summit of European Union leaders with a view to getting concessions that might, she hopes, save her Brexit deal. Well, the main sticking point are the arrangements for the Irish border if a trade deal is not reached after the transition period, known as the backstop. There are fears that the United Kingdom could be permanently bound to EU rules, and it is a key issue for her Conservative Party critics, who forced last night's vote of confidence at Westminster, which the Prime Minister managed to survive. Well, the EU leaders gathering here in Brussels right now, and their first session started about half an hour ago. They have made it clear they won't renegotiate the Brexit deal itself, but the BBC has seen the draft conclusions of this summit, which suggests that they will try to offer new assurances about that backstop arrangement. Here's our Brussels correspondent, Adam Fleming.
Safe in her job, for now, Theresa May has sped to Brussels to secure tweaks to the Brexit deal. First stop, a meeting with the Irish Prime Minister. The focus is on the backup plan for avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland, the so-called backstop.
My focus now is on ensuring that I can get those assurances that we need to get this deal over the line, because I genuinely believe it's in the best interests of both sides, the UK and the EU, to get the deal over the line, to agree a deal. But I recognise the strength of concern in the House of Commons, and that's what I will be putting to colleagues today. I don't expect an immediate breakthrough, but what I do hope is that we can start to work as quickly as possible on the assurances that are necessary.
The EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, isn't willing to do any more negotiating, but EU leaders are considering 6 paragraphs of written reassurance. They will say the backstop is temporary and would only be in place for as long as needed, not forever. The EU will pledge to continue negotiating a trade deal with the UK, even if the backstop comes into force. And the UK and the EU will work on more reassurance about the backstop, which could be finalised in January. None of that would be legally binding, but if all the 27 other leaders sign up to it here tonight, it would be politically binding. And there is a promise of stronger stuff to come. Arriving for their traditional pre-summit meetings, EU leaders said they wanted to help, but there were limits.
They need to achieve good solutions. It's impossible on the Brexit for us to change our position.
That was the message in the German Parliament this morning too. It passed a motion calling the idea of a better Brexit deal an illusion.
Unser klares Interesse ist weiter eine Einigung mit Großbritannien.
Our clear interest continues to be an agreement with Great Britain. The agreement negotiated on for many months is truly a fair compromise. It is a good basis for an orderly exit and for the creation of close future ties. There is no basis to unravel this agreement. We've made this clear again in recent days and nothing will change.
Mrs May has convinced the EU to lend her a hand. But can anything she brings back from Brussels convince angry MPs back at home?
Well, all the EU leaders, as they've been arriving here in Brussels, have been saying pretty much the same thing, which is they're not going to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement itself, but they're happy to try to come up with some assurances for the British Prime Minister, if they can, on the backstop that would help her. For example, Angela Merkel of Germany saying we will see if there can be additional assurances. President Macron of France saying there can be political discussions but not legal discussions. So really it's a question of whether, if she does get assurances, will they be in any sense legally binding? Let's talk to James Crisp, Brussels correspondent for the Daily Telegraph newspaper, who's here with me. What do you think? Is she going to get what she needs?
I think she'll get part of what she needs of this, excuse me, part of what she needs. She'll get some warm words today. But later on, at a later summit, I'm afraid my voice is gone.
Okay, have a sip of water. While you have a sip of water, let me just tell you what's been going on in terms of the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, because he has been talking after the meeting with Theresa May a little bit earlier on. Let's hear what Leo Varadkar had to say.
The deal that we have is the only deal on the table. It took over 2 years, or almost 2 years, to negotiate, and while it's far from perfect, I believe it is good for Ireland, good for Britain and good for the European Union, and I sincerely hope that it can still be ratified in the next couple of weeks. When it comes to the assurances that Prime Minister May is seeking, as the European Union, we're very keen to offer explanations, assurances, clarifications, anything that may assist MPs to understand the agreement and hopefully to support it, but the backstop is not on the table.
That's Leo Varadkar there, the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, speaking after he met Theresa May just before this summit got underway. Well, what about getting her deal through the House of Commons? We can talk to Chris Morris in a moment. But for the first, let's just remind you that you're watching BBC News and we're here at the European Union Summit where Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, is asking for assurances, particularly on the Irish border question, that she hopes will help get through her deal through the Houses of Parliament in the UK. Well, we talked to Chris Morris of our Reality Check team a bit more about the vote when there is a vote. And Chris, we're hearing now from Downing Street that that vote, which was postponed already, is not now going to happen before Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of expected that. That was the mood music. Now we've been told by a spokeswoman for Number 10 that it will happen as soon as possible in January and certainly before January the 21st. So what happens if that vote is approved? Well, first of all, of course, once it is approved, then the withdrawal agreement would have to be turned into UK law. And I think in that process we would see a bit of a kind of a war of attrition from Theresa May's opponents, including those on her own backbenches, to try and amend or change whatever that agreement says. If it gets through that process in the House of Commons, it also then needs to be ratified in the European Parliament. And one of the reasons is why you can't change the Irish backstop too much is if you did that, and there's no appetite for changing the legal text in the withdrawal agreement, but if you offered too many assurances about certain aspects of it, maybe those in the European Parliament would say, well, hang on a minute, this is not enough reassurance for Ireland. And the European Parliament has made it clear in a statement in the last couple of days, we stick firmly with Ireland. But if it gets ratified in Westminster and in the European Parliament, then it does mean that the UK leaves the European Union on the 29th of March next year, and then we would enter into this transition period, certainly 21 months to begin with, possibly extendable by 1 or 2 years, and it's during that period, of course, that there would be frantic efforts to restart the clock, and the second phase of Brexit negotiations would begin on what the future relationship looks like, in particular trying to get a future trade relationship up and running, which would mean we'd no longer need to worry about the backstop in the first place.
And the Prime Minister said the vote has to be by January the 21st. What if the vote happens and she loses? And frankly, all the arithmetic at the moment is still pointing towards a defeat unless she can get some pretty major concessions here from the EU.
Yeah, if the vote is rejected, and I suppose the first thing is, could it be further modified in any way? And the problem is the modification, or if you like the clarification, the word the EU likes to use, is taking place already before we've even had a first vote. So if it was rejected in January, it's kind of hard to see Theresa May coming back again and saying to EU leaders, can I have even more? Now, one possibility, of course, would be that MPs themselves could come up with a slightly different plan, but if that was not possible, then really the default position would be leaving the EU with no deal at all on the 29th of March. Some people on the Tory right, if you like, said that's going to be fine, we can deal with that. Many people in government, in business, say the risk of that is simply too great. Now, if no deal is taken off the table, you need a new political breakthrough. Is an election a possibility, with potentially a new Prime Minister coming in and a new Brexit process? Well, if that is to be the case, you'd probably need to extend the Article 50 negotiation period, and the EU would want to know pretty firmly that if that were to happen, that there would be some new thinking on the table. They don't want to just have the same argument continuing for months and months. The last option, of course, could we see a path towards another referendum, which an increasing number of politicians have been calling for. I think the chances of it are probably going up. Could that lead to no Brexit at all? Now, of course, if you had another referendum, there's no guarantee that a Remain side would win. It could be a vote for some kind of deal to leave, or it could even be a vote to leave with no deal at all. So, in essence, all options are on the table, but the main thing we have to remember, the way Article 50 is structured, is that there is an end date and the clock is ticking. Yeah,
and just a brief word about what's going on here right now. Theresa May in with the EU leaders, trying to set out for them exactly what she needs. She said she's talked about legal assurances and political assurances to make her deal more sellable to the House of Commons. Bluntly, is she going to get those assurances, do you think?
I don't think she's going to get anything binding legal commitments today. I mean, clearly there's language available. We've seen a draft text of a potential statement which says, trying to offer even more reassurance that this is a temporary solution, that the backstop would never be permanent, that there would be negotiations on a future trade agreement, even if the backstop did have to come into effect, because the EU doesn't really like the backstop plan. It doesn't really want it to be implemented. But a legal requirement at the moment, I don't think she'd be able to get that. But the EU has also indicated that it's prepared to continue a discussion in January to try and find a form of words within its own legal constraints, if you like, that can help her, if possible, to get this through the House of Commons.
All right, Chris, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Well, as I say, Theresa May is in with the other 27 leaders right now, spelling out what she wants, what she's hoping for from them. She did say on her way in that she wasn't expecting any sort of immediate breakthrough, but we'll have to wait and see. So that's what's happening this afternoon, and then this evening there's a dinner for all the EU leaders. She will be there, but at the end of that dinner she then leaves, and always a slightly awkward moment, the other 27 then discuss Brexit and the future of the UK without the British Prime Minister. So that's the latest from here in Brussels. Let's go back to Westminster now for the latest from there, and Simon.
Ben, thank you very much. Ben Brown there. Well, good afternoon from Westminster. The Prime Minister confirming this morning that she won't lead her party into the next election. It now seems the so-called meaningful vote for MPs on her Brexit deal is unlikely to be held next week. In fact, we've had confirmation in the last hour or so it certainly won't be before Christmas. It will be before January the 21st. Tensions are still running high within the Conservative Party after last night's vote of confidence, as our political correspondent Ian Watson now reports.
The morning after the night before at Westminster, not exactly a new dawn for the Prime Minister. The vote of confidence was, if not disastrous, certainly disappointing, with more than a third of her MPs wanting her to go. She confirmed today that she had to promise not to lead her party into another election. Her focus now was on her deal.
What I'm clear about is the next general election is in 2022, and I think it's right that another party leader takes us into that general election. My focus now is on ensuring that I can get those assurances that we need to get this deal over the line.
And the main issue, just in case you don't know by now, is the backstop, staying close to EU rules to avoid a hard border in Ireland. Her critics, even some of her cabinet, believe she needs a legally watertight assurance that it's temporary. This morning, ministers were hopeful of progress.
And I wish her every success today in making sure that she delivers on the questions some of my colleagues have had about the backstop.
We have a period of time now, following the vote last night, for the Prime Minister to have those discussions with European colleagues. And I think we saw in the language that was reported last night that there is some movement.
But this former Conservative leader doesn't think there's been nearly enough. He says the EU needs the smack of firm government.
What's on offer is what she forces the EU to face up to. We don't want to hear any more about the fact that the EU won't, the EU won't, the EU won't. What we want to know is, what does the UK government genuinely think that it's prepared to do? Are you prepared to leave the table? Are you prepared to take the 39 billion off the table? Are you prepared to say to the EU, for God's sake, you are the ones that will not compromise? We have compromised all the way through.
And he warns Theresa May that without significant changes, Northern Ireland's DUP could force her from office.
We may face a vote of confidence in the House. How can we rely on the DUP, all of them, to support us when they are so fundamentally offside on this agreement?
Well, Theresa May has gone to Brussels, but she leaves behind a divided party. Her Chancellor has talked about flushing out extremists. A former leader has said that that kind of talk could be the end of the party as we know it. And a current minister has said, after the apocalypse, all that will be left are ants and Tory MPs complaining about Europe and their leader. The tall order for Theresa May is that she must heal those divisions in little more than a month. MPs will vote on her revised deal on or before the 21st of January. If it's rejected, she has until the 11th of February to rethink. That doesn't leave much time for the EU Parliament to give its approval, as we're due to leave the EU by the end of March. Theresa May now needs to build bridges with her own backbenchers, and she'll be reflecting on the fact that it's easier to win a vote of confidence than to win approval for her deal at Westminster. Ian Watson, BBC News.
Well, with me now is the Labour peer, Lord Adonis, who's a supporter of the People's Vote campaign for another EU referendum. And was that campaign weakened or strengthened with that vote last night?
Well, the size of the vote against the Prime Minister, I think, means that her treaty is now dead in the water, so far as Parliament's concerned. It will now go down by a large majority. So the issue...
Well, that's on the basis that she comes back from Europe with nothing.
Well, she is going to come back with nothing. She might get some kind of declaration, but Chancellor Merkel and the European Commission have said that they're not reopening the treaty. And that's the only thing that will make a difference in terms of the actual operation of the backstop and the arrangements which have been put in place. So she has a moment of initiative because she has been re-elected by her party and people are looking to her for leadership. It is my view that the only leadership she can show that stands a chance of getting a majority in the House of Commons is for herself now to call a referendum, where what she can do, of course, is then put her treaty to the people directly.
She's already said she won't do that.
Well, but it's quite interesting. In the last 24 hours, she's been a lot more nuanced in this question of the referendum. She's been repeatedly asked to rule out that there would be a referendum, and she hasn't done so. It looks to me as if she's thinking this through. What she should do is to put it to the people with the option also to remain, which I think is now the only way for us to resolve this as a country, because there's no other course of action that could now get a majority in the House of Commons.
Well, there are those that say there are several other courses, and your party, the Labour Party, is seen as crucial because there are two things that could happen. One is Theresa May appeals to members of the Labour Party and says, look, to avoid a no deal, back my deal for Brexit. Or, and this is the other thing, is that the Labour Party says, right, this is the moment to say there is no confidence in this government. Now, a lot of eyebrows being raised that hasn't happened already. Why not?
Well, I would expect Jeremy Corbyn to come forward with a no confidence motion. But let's be frank, Conservative MPs are not turkeys voting for Christmas. They're not going to vote for an election which, in the current circumstances, they would lose. So though I strongly support Jeremy bringing a motion of confidence forward, the likelihood is... is it won't work. Well, I hope he brings it forward next week. But the
next week?
Well, I hope he does, yes. I mean, I don't speak for him, but I hope he brings it forward next week. But the likelihood is it won't pass. On the issue of no deal, everyone accepts that no deal is not going to happen. Indeed, the government has virtually told us that no deal will not happen because it will be so catastrophic for the country. So once no deal is off the table as it is, we're not going to have an election. Her deal has gone down. You know what Sherlock Holmes said? After all the impossible options have been eliminated, what's left is the improbable, and that must be the truth. And that is where we're going to end up with the referendum, which of course is entirely democratic, because nobody saw the Prime Minister's deal until 2 weeks ago. Now they can see it. 39 billion for much less good trading opportunities than we have now in the European Union. The right thing to do, on mature reflection, is to stay in the EU.
We've already had a democratic vote. You know this argument.
Yeah.
This argument goes round and round and round.
Just as we have elections periodically, and indeed we've now had the second referendum on Theresa May's leadership of the Conservative Party. So, of course, democracy isn't about one vote forever, particularly when circumstances change. And now that we can see the deal, we know it's 39 billion for a less good deal than we've got in the EU at the moment, which of course is completely against what people were told 2 years ago when they were told there'll be 350 billion a week for the NHS. That's why we should have a vote.
The issue is the backstop. That is the problem. That is the one issue that everybody says is the reason she's having real problems getting this through. It's not about anything else at this stage.
But the point is that there will be no majority for a deal without a backstop, because those of us who care about Ireland know that if you have the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland with different customs arrangements, that will lead to smuggling and potentially
two things.
to a return of the troubles.
They already have different arrangements, and there is already smuggling, isn't there?
Yeah, but it's at the margins.
Who's going to put the border up?
It's at the margins at the moment. It would be right at the centre of relations between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland if we had completely different customs areas. Indeed, the government accepts that. That is the reason why the Prime Minister negotiated the backstop. It's the reason why we support Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland both being in the same customs area. And the only way to secure that is basically to stay in the European Union.
Who puts that border up if there is a no deal? And the no deal option is getting closer and closer, isn't it?
Yeah, but this is why it's not going to happen. I mean, mark my words, I know the Parliament well. I've been in it now for 15 years. Parliament is not going to vote for chaos, illegality and potentially violence in Ireland. That's simply not going to happen. So the options which face us...
Potentially violence. The use of language is very important.
Hold on.
Are you saying that there will be violence?
The Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland has said that if there are different customs arrangements between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, the paramilitaries will be behind the smuggling and he cannot be accountable for what may happen thereafter. So this isn't me, this is the guy responsible for security and policing in Northern Ireland. That is why the Prime Minister has agreed the backstop, but it's why the best arrangement, of course, is not to leave the EU in the first place. We are a democracy, circumstances have changed, we should have a people's vote.
Alder Jones, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. We'll have plenty more on Brexit a little later, but I just want to get some more on another news story that we're covering this afternoon, and that's the government announcing extra funding for police forces in England and Wales. It's worth around £300 million. It will help fund changes to police pensions. Police and crime commissioners, and in London that means the mayor, will also be allowed to increase the policing element of council tax. Well, with me now is the policing minister, Nick Hurd. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming on. It looks a lot of money on the face of it, but in reality it's not going to change anything in terms of policing people, because this is going towards a pension pothole.
No, not at all. So broadly what I've announced today is a settlement that could lead to an increase of up to £970 million worth of public money into our police system, of which around 40% will come from increased grants from the government. The rest will come from increases in local precepts, if that's what police and crime commissioners decide to do. But that is the largest investment in our police system since 2010. And what I want it to do, with the full support of the Home Secretary, is make sure that our police forces have got protection against some cost increases, and you mentioned pensions, but are also able to carry on with their plans to recruit more officers and more detectives, which is what most of them are doing at the moment.
The shift of emphasis, if you like, to councils, the increase of the police precept, that's going to be down to them. Anybody watching you now is going to say, well, is this going to mean more police officers on the streets? Is there enough to do that?
Well, you talk about a shift to council tax. The reality is, in this settlement, almost 450 million of it is coming from increase in funds from the Home Office, from central government, and that's the first increase in grant to Police and Crime Commission since 2010. So that's a significant step.
Well, it follows a huge cut, doesn't it? I mean, it would be...
We did reduce police budgets in 2010 because we had to take some very radical action to reduce the deficit, and demand on the police at that time was stable, if not falling. Now that's changed since 2014. Demand on the police has risen. It's also got a lot more complex. The police are under pressure. I think everyone knows that, and we're absolutely determined to make sure they've got the additional support that they need to manage those cost pressures, but also critically to allow them to continue to recruit more police officers. So we're standing here talking in London, and the Commissioner is actively trying to recruit an additional 1,000 police officers. So that's a big change.
You used the word manage, and right there an hour or so ago was the chair of the Police Federation who was saying we need to be allowed to police. We need to be allowed to get on with our jobs. Reading between the lines, police officers are getting very tired of being told how to do their jobs by politicians.
But that's not what I'm doing. I spend a large time as Police Minister going around forces, talking to frontline officers, hearing their frustrations, and they're real, about their job and their ability to do the job in the way they want to. And that's why I'm determined, with the full support of Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, to make sure we do what we can to give them the additional resource they need. And we are talking about a settlement that could see an additional £970 million worth of taxpayers' money going into our police system. And I hope the public will support that, recognising that demand on the police has risen and they need more support from us.
Can I just tie in the issue of Brexit? Obviously everything is overshadowed by Brexit at the moment. What preparations are you making for the prospect of a no deal? Just had Lord Adonis saying that the Irish border, if there is no deal, talking about violence there. Are you preparing for something akin to that if there is a no deal?
Yes, as I think your viewers would expect, the government is planning, as we have to, as a contingency for a no deal scenario. It's not what I want. I don't think it's what we'll end up with, but we have to plan for it, particularly when it comes to, the security of the country. And the reality is that if we fall out of the European Union without a deal, we will fall back onto some contingency arrangements for sharing information with our European partners that would take us back in time, at a time when actually the security risks are arguably growing. So that's something I want to avoid. We will have contingencies, but they will take us back in time, which is why I am very clear as a policing minister that a no-deal scenario is one that carries risk for us in terms of security.
And do those conditions, the planning that you have, does that take into account the possibility of violence on the streets of Britain's cities?
No, I've had regular briefings with the police, and they've had additional funding from us to plan to make sure that officers up and down the country know how to use the mechanisms that we may have to fall back on if we come out of the European arrest warrant, for example. But also discussions with the police about how we manage the risk of a no-deal scenario, including the risk of some disorder. And that's in hand, as you'd expect. This is all contingency planning. It's not what we'd expect, but it's what good, serious government needs to be around, which is managing risk.
Nick Hurd, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Well, let's stay with Brexit. One of the key aims of Theresa May is to seek assurances from the EU that the plan to prevent checks at the Irish border, known as the backstop of course, will only be temporary. Key issue for her Tory critics who forced last night's ballot. And with me now is Philip Souter, who's head of public policy at the law firm Clifford Chance and has been looking into the legal ramifications of the withdrawal agreement. Thank you for joining us. Theresa May has got to come back with something that has legal standing without being a legal document. Is that possible?
Well, we don't know is the short answer to that. What we do know is that there is already something with legal standing. That's 585 pages of withdrawal agreement. And if you look through that agreement, which is very, very long, it's got recitals, articles, protocols and annexes, right? And if you look through that, then there are all sorts of references to the fact that the future agreement has to be negotiated quickly, that the backstop is only designed to be temporary, and that Article 50, the legal base of this whole thing, isn't designed to create a permanent relationship. So it's sort of already there.
But well, if it says it's got to be temporary but doesn't give an end date, and this is the criticism, then it's open-ended.
Well, exactly. So that is the criticism, and if you look at the Northern Ireland Protocol, there is the language in there, in the first article, which says that the backstop has to apply unless and until something replaces it. So you've got a tension there. You've got the fact that it can't be permanent under Article 50, really, but also that it is until something replaces it. So there is that tension, and that is difficult to get away from. But what is clear is that both parties do want to negotiate something for the future.
What would have that legal requirement? The word codicil has been thrown around. I mean, could she come back and say, I have a document in my hands, it's not a case of rewriting the agreement I already have, but this will have an impact on what we've already decided?
So there are a number of ways you could do this. You could, at the very highest level, you could add a protocol or an annex to the treaty. That's probably unlikely. You could have conclusions in the European Council document at the end of their meeting today and tomorrow, or you could have a sort of an exchange of letters. And what that would probably do is take all of the language that is already in the treaty, put it together, and perhaps add additional language saying that even if the backstop were to come into force, then during that period of time, both parties would show their best endeavours to try and get out of that backstop into the new agreement.
You hear phrases like best endeavours, and immediately, once again, it's wishy-washy, isn't it?
Well, it's legal language. Best endeavours is legal language. It's not entirely meaningless. It does oblige the parties to try, sometimes against their own sort of financial interest, because there are three levels of endeavours. There are best endeavours, reasonable endeavours, and all reasonable endeavours in the middle. So best endeavours are the strongest types of endeavours. But it's not an obligation. It's an obligation to try, not necessarily an obligation to achieve, as it were.
Philip, great to talk to you. Philip Souter, thank you very much. Thank you. Right, let's have a look at the weather. That's with Stav Danaos. Stav.
Thank you, Simon. It's been a bitterly cold day today, thanks to that strong, raw east-southeasterly wind. And tonight it's going to be really cold as well under clear skies. We're going to see pretty widespread frost developing. For most of us, it will be dry. There'll always be a bit more cloud across eastern coastal areas and some cloud associated with a very weak weather front across Northern Ireland, maybe the extreme southwest of England. But most places should be dry. Where you have the cloud, for example, Northern Ireland, 3 or 4 degrees, the low in Belfast. But look at that, the blue colours indicating sub-zero values, so widespread frost. It's going to be a very cold start to tomorrow morning, but at least on the plus side there should be a lot of sunshine around. Another dry day. The wind's still quite a feature across northern and western areas, maybe a little bit lighter across southern and eastern areas, so that may help the temperatures, but it's going to be a very cold one. Temperatures around the mid-single digits. Start to see some rain pushing into Northern Ireland later on in the day, and then as we head on into the weekend, we'll see a very unsettled spell of wet, windy weather with some significant snow across some northern areas, so stay tuned to the subsequent weather forecasts.
This is weird, isn't it?
No, still weird. But if there's a report about where I live or what I do...
It usually sounds like this.
Or it might be this.
Or maybe even this.
Or sometimes this.
The BBC Young Reporter competition wants to change that.
If you're aged between 11 and 18 and have a story you think needs telling, the BBC can help you tell it. Find your voice and enter now at bbc.co.uk/Young Reporter competition.
The headlines now from BBC News. The Prime Minister is back in Brussels for a crucial EU summit, the day after surviving a confidence vote at home. Theresa May is hoping to win fresh concessions from EU leaders to break the deadlock over the Irish backstop, to avoid physical checks on the Irish border. The government has set out its timetable for parliamentary business next week. There'll be no vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal until after Christmas. The government announces a 2.8% rise in funding for councils in England. And hospital beds in England were almost full last week, with the usual winter pressures still to come. Sport now, let's go to BBC Sports Centre, and it is Cat Downs. Cat.
Thank you, Simon. The FA has announced that Martin Glenn has resigned from his position as Chief Executive Officer and that he'll step down at the end of the season. Glenn said it had been a huge honour and a privilege to lead the organisation since 2015. In a statement, the FA credited him with creating the culture around St George's Park and the England teams, which they say has led to an unprecedented period of success. But his period in charge was marked with controversy as well as high achievement.
There's been great success on the pitch, at youth level, at senior level, for the men and for the women. He was also influential in reorganising the fixture schedule to bring about a winter break, which will come into force next season. He oversaw record investment into women's football. He's increased the diversity within the FA in terms of women's representation in staff roles and also BAME representation. So some good things there, but also some negative things as well. We had huge controversy over Sam Allardyce's short reign in charge of the national team, Mark Sampson being sacked in charge of the women's team, and also the sale of Wembley. He supported it. It didn't go through, so a mixed bag.
Celtic striker Lee Griffiths says he's doing everything he can to return to football a better and stronger person. Manager Brendan Rodgers announced yesterday that Griffiths would be taking time away from football to deal with mental health issues. Well, on the club's website, he's thanked fans and well-wishers for their kind and powerful messages of support. He says he's doing all he can to be back playing as soon as possible. Tottenham manager Mauricio Pochettino is unhappy that people aren't talking about his side as contenders for the Premier League title. Tottenham sit 5 points behind leaders Liverpool, 4 behind second-place Manchester City, ahead of their game against Burnley this weekend. Pochettino believes his players warrant more consideration.
I am happy with the perception today. When you talk about that only the perception for the people or for the media is Manchester City and Liverpool, and not us. I am not happy with the perception when they are not assessed in the right way to us. I think normally it's Liverpool and Manchester City, Chelsea, United, but not Tottenham. We are there because we compete in a very good way, because our performers are doing fantastic, but of course the perception is different.
The Women's Tennis Association has announced increased protection for mothers returning to the tour. From next season, players coming back after childbirth or injury will be able to use their previous ranking to enter 12 tournaments over a 3-year period. But Serena Williams' wish that returning mothers should also be seeded in line with their ranking has not been granted. And swimming's international governing body has announced a new competition for next year in response to criticism from some of the sport's top names. Olympic champion Adam Peaty stated last week that swimming was stuck in 1970 after FINA forced the cancellation rival event he was backing. FINA hopes the new format, known as the FINA Championship Swim Series, will appease those who have voiced frustrations with its governance recently. But BBC Sport understands that over 30 of the world's best swimmers will meet in London next week to discuss taking further action against the organisation. And that is all the sport from me for today. I'll be back on Afternoon Live tomorrow. See you then.
What? We have got... Catherine, thank you very much. Sorry about the delay there, but it's affecting everything, the cold down here. Let's move on. So what are people in other parts of the country making of the latest developments in Westminster? Well, Andrew Sinclair, he's political correspondent for BBC Look East. He's been gauging opinion at the Christmas market in Norwich.
Well, the Norwich Christmas market is well underway this week. This is one of the few places in East Anglia which actually voted to remain in the referendum. 56% of people said they wanted to stay in the EU. And at this market, there's loads of food and drink to tempt people. But voters have still been following what's been going on at Westminster.
I think they need to stop fighting amongst themselves and just get on with the matter in hand, really, and just focus on sorting out Brexit. Everyone seems to be like sort of using it as a point to sort of further their own gains in things.
Are you glad that Theresa May won yesterday?
Yeah, I am, because I think a change of leadership at the moment is just not the right thing to do. We just need to get on with what we're doing, and then that can be sorted out later on if the party's unhappy.
As a lot of people have been saying, being PM is an incredibly hard job.
Are you glad she won last night?
I'm going to stay invalid on that one.
Well, we're coming out of the cold and we're in the Sleigh Bells bar now. Let's talk to Eddie, who runs it. What have you made of the events of the last 24 hours?
Probably unnecessary for the contest to be held in the first place, because really it's about time, I think, that all of these MPs put the national interest in front of their own agendas and should take the instructions, really, of the country on board. rather than thinking a little bit more about themselves. So.
You are a Conservative Party supporter. How did you feel watching a leadership challenge taking place?
Well, I just thought that there was no need for it, really. I think she's in an impossible position. I'm not sure I completely was always of the opinion that she should have been the leader, but one or two of the others who perhaps should have been didn't put themselves up when they needed to. So I think she's just been in an impossible and an invidious position, really.
So you're happy that she stays on as Prime Minister, even though she's pretty damaged after that vote?
I think she is a bit damaged, I agree, but I don't think that there's enough of anybody else putting their head above the parapet to actually, you know, do something serious about it.
And after the week we've had at Westminster, what would your message be to MPs now?
I think it's really time for you to stop your nonsense, and I think it's about time we all pull together, because...
OK, Eddie, thank you very much indeed. At the Christmas market in Norwich, that's the view of people here. Just get on and do the job.
Very much for that. Well, Theresa May has confirmed that she won't lead the Conservative Party into the next general election in 2022. The Prime Minister, of course, is in Brussels trying to get concessions on the Brexit deal from EU leaders after surviving last night's confidence vote. Well, with me, two Conservative MPs who campaigned for leave, Tim Loughton and Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. It's a freezing night.
Absolutely.
Tim Loughton, first of all, having had hours to reflect, was that... How damaging was last night's vote? She won, but, and it's a big but, isn't it? It wasn't convincing.
Well, she won. That's the way confidence votes work under our system. I mean, at least we got on with it. Within 24 hours, we'd had 48 letters and we'd had a confidence vote, and the Prime Minister carries on. And it's really important now that everybody rallies round, however they voted, to let the Prime Minister get on with the work which she's gone to Brussels today to get on with. And fortunately, it wasn't that much of a distraction that she can now carry on that work.
And we've just been hearing from people around the country, and very much the view is, we wish you, particularly Conservatives, would stop the bickering and get on with this.
Well, I entirely agree. We've had the vote. As Tim says, she won. The bloodletting's been done. I think it is incumbent now on the party to come behind her and support her in this endeavour to try and get a better deal in Brussels.
The wisdom of announcing that you're not going to stand at the next election. We've seen previous Prime Ministers do that, and the accusation is you immediately become a lame duck Prime Minister.
Well, I think it was a pragmatic thing last night. She was bound to be asked the question, and therefore she had to give an answer. Much better to do it before she was asked the question, and much better to say that she was not going to stand at the next election in 2022, which allowed all those that wanted to support her in the short term to be able to do so. Otherwise, I suspect the vote would have been more heavy against her.
Do you agree? Do you
think... I think that's right. It was actually slightly emotional, because she said she would like to have taken us through the next election, not least because of the mess-up that was last year's election, which she called prematurely and absolutely acknowledges it was wrong to do it. She needs to get us through Brexit. I mean, this is just such a completely dominating issue that changing the leader at the moment, whatever her faults may be, didn't actually change the problem that we've got to find a solution to. I think after Brexit has gone through, hopefully, March the 29th, we get back to some sort of normality, then she'll reassess her position, and at that stage it may well be that we look to another leader. But for the next few months it's vital we've got some continuity.
We were having a chat about this programme earlier, and we were saying which Conservative MPs we'd like to talk to, and someone said, we've got a Conservative. The immediate cry was, which side? The party is so split. Still, any hope that last night's vote would keep it, or in some way deal with the issue of the extremists, as Philip Hammond called them strangely, I mean, it's still completely split.
Well, we will have a process. I'm Treasurer of the 22. We expedited the process yesterday very quickly indeed, which was entirely the right thing to do. When she decides and the party decides it's the right time for her to stand down, we will have a process. We will have a runoff with hustings, with votes, until we emerge with two candidates. And that is the fair and democratic way to do it.
Yeah, look, we are the Conservative Party. A few of our colleagues have said some not very helpful things about other members of the Conservative Party in Parliament. We must rally together and get on with the job.
But there's no evidence that's happening.
Well, it's 24 hours since we had the result. I think we need a bit of calm over the weekend. Look, I'm afraid what's going on in Parliament and within the Conservative Party reflects what's going on in the country. If you want politicians to reflect what ordinary, normal people are like, then there is a split in the Conservative Party as to what our approach should be between Remainers and Leavers. And we've got that split in the country. This is a deeply divisive issue. We need to come together to give some leadership and actually rally around to try and get the country back together again. So